a spiritual treat this evening. As of last week, we had 3 of our young high school guys speak during the evening worship last week on their sermons that they did and prepared at the preacher training camp at the Louisville Church of Christ. And this Sunday, we're going to hear 3 more speakers, Andy Morstein, Sam Morstein, and James Gatewood. Preacher training camp, if you weren't here last week to hear what it's all about, is in the 3rd week in July every year. For the past 11 years, we about 48 speakers, teenagers last month, spent the week learning the art of speaking, learning how to put together a lesson, learning how to speak to listeners the gospel of Christ. And so that's what we're going to hear this evening. Preacher training camp is so special to me. It made a huge impact on me back in 2006 when I was pushed to go to that camp. Did not really want to go, but I'm sure glad I did. The impact it made on me inspired me to go into the ministry, to study the scriptures, and to ultimately work as I currently do in the Lord's church. And so we're first going to hear from James Gatewood. James, I heard him already speak this parable. Because he was selected as one of the 3 speakers at Preacher Training Camp this year to speak at the banquet on the Friday night to conclude the camp. James, as well as others in this group, have expressed his desire to one day work in the church. He's another intelligent Christian that we have in the youth group who takes his faith very serious. I've heard personally from many already that James serves as a spiritual rock in our youth group. And so we are going to be so privileged to hear him preach a message this evening on the parable of the shrewd manager.
You know, parables are some of my favorite things in the Bible to read. There's something about that air of mystery that they have, that they're hard to interpret sometimes. They're not like the normal teachings of Jesus, the straightforward teachings that are direct. Parables are often hard to interpret, hard to understand. I suppose this is why in Matthew chapter 13, verse 11, Jesus tells us that the knowledge of the secrets of the kingdom of heaven are given to some, but not to others. This is a testament to how difficult it can sometimes be to understand parables and understand Jesus' teachings. But as I studied this parable, the parable of the shrewd manager in Luke chapter 16, verses 1 through 9, at Preacher Training Camp this year, I developed an appreciation for the fact that we have these parables, that we have the teachings of Jesus in this book, and that we can read them over and over. Because many people who heard Jesus teach only got to hear each parable once, but we can read them over and over until we have a good understanding of them. The reason I say this is because the parable of the shrewd manager is one that I struggled with understanding for a long time. A few months ago, in fact, before Preacher Training Camp, I was looking at this parable, and I was studying it, and I eventually gave up on it because I didn't understand the meaning or the application. But after hours of studying and meditating and searching for the answer, God revealed it to me. God revealed the truth of this passage, and it's just such a blessing that we have that we can have the truth of God's kingdom revealed to us. The truth of this passage is a simple one. It's a simple truth for a complex passage, but it's an important truth. It is that we need to be generous. And tonight we're going to talk about 2 points. In these points, we will examine a comparison between the manager's situation in this parable and our own situation. These 2 points are the coming crisis, and second of all, the foresighted solution. Let's read this parable together. Luke chapter 16, verses 1 through 9. Jesus told his disciples, "There was a rich man whose manager was accused of wasting his possessions. So he called him in and asked him, 'What is this I hear about you? Give an account of your management, because you cannot be manager any longer.' The manager said to himself, 'What shall I do now? My master has taken away my job. I'm not strong enough to dig, and I'm ashamed to beg. I know what I'll do, so that when I lose my job here, people will welcome me into their homes.' So he called in each one of his master's debtors. He asked the first, 'How much do you owe my master?' 800 gallons of olive oil,' he replied. The manager told him, 'Take your bill, sit down quickly, and make it 400. Then he asked the second, 'And how much do you owe?' 1,000 bushels of wheat,' he replied. He told him, take your bill and make it 800. Now comes the tricky part. Verse 8, the master commended the dishonest manager because he had acted shrewdly. For the people of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own kind than are the people of the light. I tell you, use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourselves, so that when it is gone, you will be welcomed into eternal dwellings. So we see first in this manager's situation that he has a coming crisis. He is soon to be jobless, and he is soon to be without the opportunity to gain a new job. Now the reason he is soon to be without job opportunity is because he is weak and because he is prideful. We see that he's weak because he says he is not strong enough to dig, and that he's prideful because he says he's too ashamed to beg. And in the same way, unfortunately for us, our weakness and our pride can cause us to face a coming crisis as well. In John chapter 15, verse 5, Jesus says, apart from me, you can do nothing. And yet so often we rely on our own strength, and we rely on confidence in ourselves, when we should rely fully on God. And if we continue in this pride and do not get our lives right with God, we have a coming crisis that we are facing as well. Because if we do not get our lives right with God, we are soon to be lifeless, and we are soon to be without the opportunity to gain new life. 2 Thessalonians chapter 1, verses 8 and 9 talks about this coming crisis for those who do not have their lives right with God. 2 Thessalonians 1, 8 and 9. He will punish those who do not know God and do not obey the gospel of our Lord Jesus. They will be punished with everlasting destruction and shut out from the presence of the Lord and from the majesty of his power. Can you imagine a worse fate than this? To be separated from the presence of God and to never have the opportunity to ever have a relationship with him again. This everlasting destruction is a fate more terrible than any of us could ever imagine. And so we must look for a solution. The manager in this parable found a four-sided solution, which is point 2. I call it a four-sided solution because this manager begins to look towards the future. He begins to prepare for the future by canceling parts of the debts owed to his master, so that the people, the debtors, would in turn welcome him into their homes after he lost his job. But I tell you that although this manager was commended in the end by his master, there was nothing noble about what he did. There was nothing praiseworthy about what he did. He essentially gave away his master's money. He gave away someone else's money, and he's rewarded for it in the end. But I also tell you that we're exactly the same as this manager. Our four-sided solution is one and the same as well. We have to look towards the future and prepare for the future by canceling the debts owed to us. And not only this, but by giving generously to others. Because in the last verse of this parable, verse 9 of Luke chapter 16, Jesus does not limit our use of worldly wealth to simply forgiving debts. Luke chapter 12, verse 33. Jesus commands us, sell your possessions and give to the poor. Provide purses for yourselves that will not wear out, a treasure in heaven that will not be exhausted, where no thief comes near and no moth destroys. If we give generously to others, we are promised by God a treasure in heaven, a treasure that will not be destroyed, a treasure that will never be stolen and will not be exhausted. And yet I tell you again, that we do not deserve this treasure any more than this manager deserved to be commended by his master. Because just like the manager, we cannot give away anything that is actually ours. Everything that we say that we own is really God's, and has really been entrusted to us and given to us by God. So when we give things away to others, we're not giving away our own things, but God's things. And yet, we're told we'll be rewarded for it in the end. This is a testament to God's amazing grace, his amazing love, his amazing mercy and generosity, that we, being just like this dishonest manager, can still be rewarded. And so I tell you again that we have to be generous. We have to give and to forgive generously. When people owe us money, say, you loan a friend $10 or $20 or $50, however much it may be, and he says, "Oh, I'll pay you back later," I would challenge you to stop him and say, "No, you don't have to do that. You can keep the money because my treasure is laid up for me in heaven." When you get a paycheck or an allowance or you find money on the street, I would encourage you to set aside it immediately and set aside a portion of it for the work of God's church and a portion of it to give away to the needy. Because when we give, we are told that we will receive a reward that is even greater. Proverbs 11, verses 24 and 25 talks about this principle as well. Proverbs 11, 24 and 25 reads, "One man gives freely, yet gains even more. Another withholds unduly, but comes to poverty. A generous man will prosper. He who refreshes others will himself be refreshed." When we give generously, we're told that we will gain even more. Maybe not in this life, but certainly in heaven. And so I challenge you one more time to put aside your pride and to look towards the future by giving generously to others so that you will not have to face the